Harry stood abruptly, the chair scraping the studio floor, an audible marker of his frustration. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this," he snapped, his voice sharp. But Jane, rising slowly to her feet, met his gaze without hesitation. "No, you don't," she said firmly. "And frankly, we don't have to pretend that your presence here is some kind of gift to our viewers. If you can't handle basic scrutiny, then perhaps you should stick to interviews that print whatever your PR team provides." The other panelists mirrored Jane's stance. United, they formed an unyielding front. Experienced professionals, defending their integrity. The studio audience, silent until now, seemed to collectively lean forward, sensing a rare moment of accountability unfolding live on television. "This is ridiculous," Harry said, his voice cracking under stress and humiliation. "I came here to discuss important issues, and you've turned it into a circus." Nadia leaned in, calm but unflinching. "The only circus here, Harry, is the one you've created. You could have answered Jane's questions professionally, had a real conversation. But instead, you chose to insult us, and now you're throwing a tantrum. Because we didn't bow and scrape." Kay added, her tone measured and direct. "This is exactly the entitled behavior that makes people question whether the royal family is relevant in modern Britain." Harry's face shifted from red to pale. "How dare you question the relevance of the royal family? Do you have any idea what we've done for this country? What have you done lately?" he demanded. Linda, never one to hold back, countered sharply. "Besides complaining about how hard your life is while living in unimaginable luxury, what exactly have you done?" Jane has raised millions for charity. Nadia campaigns tirelessly for better mental health services. Kay has exposed corruption in local governments. What have you done besides trade on your family name and complain about perceived injustices? The audience murmured agreement. Harry's composure crumbled entirely. His public image, carefully curated for years, disintegrating in real time. "I served in the military. I've worked with veterans, disadvantaged children, people with real problems," he protested. Jane's voice softened slightly, but remained unwavering. "And we respect that. But military service doesn't exempt anyone from basic politeness, professionalism, or accountability. You have spent 10 minutes insulting this show, belittling everyone on this panel, and speaking to Linda as if she were beneath you. And now you're surprised we aren't impressed." Harry's defenses faltered. Harry walked toward the exit, shoulders slumped, dignity diminished. Slowly, applause rose from the audience, starting tentatively, then swelling into a thunderous ovation. Jane's smile returned, calm and resolute. The show had delivered a rare spectacle, a public figure challenged, exposed, and reminded that respect is earned, not demanded. Crossing the line. At first, I thought she might take the hint and step back. But Karen had a way of turning any minor disagreement into a full-blown confrontation. Her heels clicked across the grass, each step punctuating her audacity. I felt a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling up. Here I was, on my own property, enjoying a peaceful morning, and she was treating me like a criminal for wearing a sando. "Karen, seriously," I said, raising my voice just enough to assert authority. "You're on private property. You need to leave. Now." She paused for a second, narrowing her eyes, as if weighing whether to obey or escalate further. Then she smirked and waved her phone. "I'm documenting this for the HOA. They'll see you're in violation. Documenting is fine, but only from the sidewalk, not from inside my yard," I replied, trying to keep calm. I could feel my neighborly patience fraying. My hands tightened around my coffee mug as I stepped toward her, careful not to make sudden movements that could be misinterpreted. Karen, however, seemed to misinterpret everything. Her moral compass, it seemed, pointed solely toward her own sense of justice. She stepped closer, ignoring my warnings. "You can't intimidate me. I'm just doing my duty." At that moment, I realized that reasoning with her was futile. Her obsession had gone beyond mere HOA enforcement. It was personal, and she had just crossed a line, one that legally separated a homeowner from an overzealous vigilante. I reached for my phone and dialed the local non-emergency police line. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to report a trespasser. She's on my property without permission." Karen, clearly noticing my action, started pacing, muttering something about lawsuits and neighborhood conduct. She was now so caught up in her imagined authority that she hadn't even noticed the very real consequences she was about to face. Within minutes, a patrol car rolled up the street. The officers, professional and calm, stepped out and approached the situation cautiously. Karen, seeing the uniformed authority, finally hesitated. I explained clearly and concisely. She had refused to leave, despite repeated requests, and was on my property without consent. Karen's protests escalated. I'm enforcing the rules. You're violating community standards. One of the officers shook his head. Ma'am, this isn't about HOA rules. This is private property. You've been asked to leave. You need to step off the lawn immediately. Her defiance only grew, and in that moment, the absurdity of the situation hit me. A trivial argument about clothing had transformed into a legal confrontation. What had begun as a peaceful morning in a tank top was now teetering on the edge of criminal trespass. And then it happened, the moment I never expected. The arrest. Karen's defiance reached its peak in a way that seemed almost cinematic. The officers had politely asked her multiple times to leave, yet she planted her feet firmly on my lawn and waved her hands as if to claim some imaginary moral high ground. I have every right to enforce the HOA rules, she shouted, her voice cracking with frustration. One of the officers, trying to stay calm, explained again. Ma'am, HOA rules do not give you permission to enter someone's private property. You need to step off the lawn right now. Karen scoffed. I'm protecting the neighborhood. You don't understand. It was then that I realized there was no reasoning with her. Her sense of righteousness had completely overridden common sense. I stood back, coffee mug in hand, silently hoping she would finally leave. But the officers, after repeated warnings, had no choice but to act. Ma'am, we are going to have to place you under arrest if you refuse to comply, one of them said firmly. Karen's face went pale for the first time, and her voice wavered. You can't do that. I'm just. Step off the property, or you'll be taken into custody. The officer interrupted, raising a hand. A tense silence fell over the lawn. Birds chirped, unaware of the drama unfolding beneath the morning sun. Karen finally seemed to hesitate, but then her stubbornness surged again. I'm not leaving. This is ridiculous. The officers exchanged glances, then gently, but firmly, began escorting her toward the patrol car. Karen's protests turned into a chaotic mix of shouts and resistance. I felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. Here I was, standing in my own yard, having coffee, while an HOA enforcer was being arrested for ignoring basic property law. Neighbors peered through their windows, some whispering, some recording the spectacle on their phones. I realized how surreal this scene must have looked. A homeowner in a tank top, calmly observing as a middle-aged woman, full of self-righteous fury, was handcuffed and led away. When it was over, one of the officers turned to me and said, "You did the right thing by calling us. Private property is protected by law, and refusing to leave after repeated warnings is considered trespassing." I nodded, still in slight shock, but also feeling a sense of vindication. I took a deep breath, sipped my coffee, and looked at my lawn. It was as peaceful as it had been 5 minutes ago. Yet nothing about that morning would ever feel normal again. It was a strange victory. I had defended my right to wear a simple sando on my own property, something I had never thought could become a battle. The lesson was clear. Sometimes, people take their duty. As I watched the patrol car drive away, I couldn't help but wonder what Karen would say to the HOA board next. Would she frame herself as a hero or admit to the consequences of her actions? Somehow, I doubted the answer would be humble. But for now, my lawn was mine again. Peace had returned. Aftermath and reflection. The neighborhood slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Birds chirped, sprinklers rotated lazily over freshly mown lawns, and the distant hum of traffic reminded me that life went on, even after such a bizarre morning. I stepped onto my porch, still wearing my sando, sipping what remained of my coffee, and allowed myself a small, victorious smile. My backyard, my sanctuary, was peaceful once again. Word of Karen's arrest spread through the neighborhood, faster than I could have imagined. By afternoon, whispers and stares greeted me wherever I went. Some neighbors shook their heads in disbelief, others smirked knowingly, and a few approached to offer sympathetic chuckles. One elderly couple across the street even waved, giving me the thumbs up. It was surreal. An ordinary morning turned into a dramatic story that seemed too absurd to be real. The HOA, of course, couldn't ignore the incident. A few days later, I received a formal notice acknowledging Karen's trespassing, along with a reminder that private property rights are legally protected. Interestingly, they also subtly encouraged everyone to maintain neighborly decorum, to avoid similar situations. It was as if they were tiptoeing around the fact that one of their most aggressive enforcers had been arrested on my lawn. Reflecting on the events, I realized how easily power and authority can be misused when rules are followed without understanding their limits. Karen believed she was defending the community, but her actions were reckless and legally indefensible. It was a stark reminder that sometimes people who think they're enforcing order are the ones creating chaos. I also thought about my own reaction. I stayed calm, clear, and assertive, knowing exactly where the boundaries of my property and my rights were. That clarity made all the difference. It wasn't about confrontation for the sake of confrontation. It was about protecting personal freedom and understanding when to call on real authority to resolve conflicts. Life in the neighborhood slowly normalized. Karen eventually returned, but her influence waned. Conversations about HOA rules became less about fear and more about respect. And for me, every time I step onto my lawn in the morning, I'm reminded of that absurd yet empowering day. A day when a simple sando became a symbol of standing your ground. Sometimes, life teaches lessons in the most unexpected ways. For me, it was a combination of humor, disbelief, and quiet triumph. It was a story I knew I'd retell many times, and each time, it would remind me that boundaries, both personal and legal, exist for a reason. In the end, it wasn't about the sando, the HOA, or even Karen. It was about knowing your rights, staying calm under pressure, and never letting anyone overstep on your own turf. My lawn, my rules, my sando.